Welcome to another great edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large and editorial cartoonist of Mississippi Today. I had to think about that for a half second because we're sitting here on the front porch with David Rae Morris. And David just got done with a really cool Conversation. Yeah, that's it. I was just like completely had a brain moment. No, really great panel on, of course, remembering Willie Morris. And like I said, you know a little bit about your dad, probably more than most folks. And it was great. It had Rick Cleveland. It had, of course, Joanne, who just came through just a second ago, and had, of course, Curtis Wilkie, who's incredible, and, of course, the great Rick Cleveland as well. Stories were fantastic, and thank you for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
You are truly, and this is the praise part of the interview, you're one of my favorite storytellers, and you have been. And I think the thing why I really appreciate you is that I can totally respect your career and the fact how you've evolved, you've reinvented yourself, you tried new things, you kept doing new things, and the conference at the front porch, we're literally right here on a front porch in Plain Air, Mississippi, and it's just been a great conference so far.
It has.
So and I've had like 97 glasses of tea, so we'll get through like
if you get up and need to go to the bathroom, I'll just talk.
Well, the problem may be that we get a 10-minute conversation in 3 seconds because I may get it all out a little bit. But like I said, it was great hearing the stories about your dad, and I know that was probably fun for you to get up and tell those stories too.
It was. I always like to be spontaneous, and Rick Cleveland had texted me 3 or 4 days ago and said, "What do you want to talk about?" And I said, well, I have nothing specific. I can always talk about the shadow.
Yeah.
Living in the shadow of my father, which is complicated. And it's not always pretty. But I've come to terms with it, and the way it evolved today was just, very organic. Yeah. So I like having conversations that are spontaneous. I had made a bunch of notes, and I don't think I followed any of them.
Yeah. Well, I think what was really great about the panel was that it told the funny stories, obviously, because Dad was a very funny person. He really was. And he was also made people feel very important and made them feel loved on that. But I think it also captured the impact that he had both on journalism and on writing and on Mississippi and on Oxford. And I felt like that it was a great combination of all those components.
That's true. We talked about North Toward Home early. Joanne read the opening page, and Curtis talked about how important it was for him. Curtis is half a generation younger than my father, but was one of those young Mississippians who left when he could.
Yeah.
And but one story I wanted to tell was I had dinner Wednesday night in Clarksdale with Mary Thompson, who's Wright Thompson's mother.
Yeah. And
she told the story about how when Wright was in 10th grade, he got mono. And he had to stay home from school for a month.
Yeah.
And he was at home bored to tears, and they gave him a copy of North Toward Home.
Wow.
And he read North Toward Home, and after that he said, I'm going to be a writer. And
what a gift that's given the world.
And I think Wright Thompson is one of the finest writers today.
Yeah.
He just knows how to craft a sentence, and if North Toward Home helped him get there, then I'll take credit for it, or I'll take credit for it on behalf of my father.
Think about all the things they could have given him.
Yes.
I mean, Mattel football, electronic football, or something like that. But,
Right. So that was a great story that I meant to tell, and we just went off on a different tangent. So.
Yeah, but when I told the story yesterday when I was giving my speech that one of my bosses handed me a copy of North Toward Home when I moved here, and I was just like,
and that was like in Arizona.
It was in San Diego, California.
San Diego, yeah.
So they got your dad, and that's the thing. I mean, even though your dad didn't technically have a bestseller, he was revered by writers, and because he was a great editor, and he was a good friend, and he was a lot of fun. I mean, how many stories people talk about, the Sizzler and so forth in Oxford and trips, and
It used to be, that every time I would do something like this, somebody would come up to me and tell a Sizzler story, or I met your dad at the warehouse or the gin or the Hoka, and we ended up back at his house and talked about literature till 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And it started slacking off. I didn't get it so much, but this weekend at this conference, I've had 15 people come up and tell Willie stories.
Yeah.
Even Caroline Herring had a Willie story.
Oh, I know, and I was overhearing some of those, and they were really great. She's pretty talented and great storyteller in her own right, too.
Yes.
So, and she performed last night.
And it was beautiful.
It was just beautiful. Gorgeous. You know, and I was thinking about that because, you know, here, like I said, I moved here in '96, and I work with Bobby Cleveland, Rick Cleveland, Orly Hood, you know, all these people.
The A-Team.
The A-Team. I mean, literally a peak moment in the Clarion Ledger's history, and almost to a person. All these writers loved writing, and they loved your dad. I mean, they did. And I know Rick was a big part of the funeral, and I remember he passed. I got to meet him. I guess I was trying to think, The Ghosts of Mississippi, the book. Yeah, that book signing. And I cherish it because he signed it. But he was like, oh. And he started naming off 2 or 3 of my cartoons he'd read. And I was like, Willie Morris has read my cartoons. This is incredible. But he made me feel 10 feet tall. And just meeting him in a book signing, which that's hard to do. You've done book signings. You know that sometimes
it's hard work.
It is, because you're just having to engage with every single person. But he just took that moment to make just a 28-year-old snot-nosed kid seem like something that was important on that. You talk about the shadow. And, I mean, number one, you didn't exactly try to follow his exact path. No, and you were smart. I mean, like I said, you're very gifted with camera and very gifted as a visual storyteller, like I said before. But I could imagine that, you know, I mean, my dad was a car mechanic, so it's not like I had to worry about, you know, following. My kids don't draw. So it's like, you know, and I kind of encourage them to do their thing. What was he like growing up as having him as a dad?
Well, I mean, it sort of took different paths. You know, my parents were together until I was 9, and they divorced. Yeah. And then I had literally 2 separate lives, completely separate lives, and that was hard because, you know, the life I had with my mother was very staid and proper, and, you know, we had subscriptions to the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and we'd go see plays and go see chamber music at the Metropolitan Museum, and you know, it was all very and go out to dinner like maybe once a month, and you know, it was all very proper. And then my father was editor of Harper's, and he entertained. He would go out to dinner every night, and he would take me to Knicks games, and we'd go see baseball. And so when I was younger, that was you know, it was a lot of fun. And then he left Harper's and went to the eastern end of Long Island, and you know, he sort of joined a writers' community out there. Yeah. And so we would go to these parties, and at any given time, he would go to a party, and Norman Mailer would be there, or John Knowles, or Truman Capote, or Irwin Shaw, Jim Jones, Shana Alexander, Betty Friedan. You know, there's just the who's who of David Halberstam, George Plimpton. You know, all of the important writers of the time were there, and he was a part of that scene. So that was pretty profound for someone like me. You know, at the same time, you know, I was becoming a young man, and you know, was doing photography, and you know, it was hard, and it's still hard today because, you know, talking about the shadow, you know, he still casts, you know, his accomplishments, what he accomplished in a reasonably short period of time, you know, still hangs over me. In terms of, you know, I'm never going to reach that pinnacle. So how do I be nice to myself and you know, accept what I have accomplished? Right. And it's an ongoing thing. And the interesting thing is that now I'm the age that I am in the position that he was when I was in my early 20s with my daughter. And so I have to be, who's majoring in photography.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I have to be really, really careful about, you know, how I encourage and support her. Yeah. You know, I can't, and I catch myself every now and then, you know, I'll go off and say, you need to do this, you need to do that. And fortunately, she's really, really good at putting me in my place. And she will simply text me, yes, David. And that's my cue to say, you know, back off.
Yeah, it's not that.
Because I mean, I would try to do this. And my father would do the same thing. He would tell me what to do and how to do it, but I didn't have the tools yet to do that. So it created a lot of tension, and as a consequence, I picked up the camera and started photographing him. As sort of a defense mechanism. Yeah. And then in addition to, you know, it was that and his lifestyle, which by my early 20s I realized I didn't want to be on that same trajectory.
Right.
So
potential for burnout.
Well, yeah. And so from my early 20s to my mid to late 20s, our relationship was somewhat fraught.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he would write me these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful letters.
Yeah.
And so that's why I put this volume out called Letters from My Father.
In which you've got right.
Which is, I just happen to have a copy in my lap.
That's right. There you go, folks.
Love Daddy, Letters from My Father.
Which he was nice enough to sign for me. Thank you.
I haven't signed it yet.
Oh, you have? Okay, we'll have to see how the rest of this interview
I got my pen.
Ooh, that's what I draw with too. Microns.
What number?
I usually do 0.05, 0.07, 0.08, and then 0.01.
This is 0.05.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's
a good medium.
That's my standard one. I've got some 8, some 08s.
Yeah, the 8s are good for thicker, obviously for thicker lines, and so
sometimes I use that, but sometimes they don't have just the packs of the 05, so I have to get a variety pack of the the 02, the 05, and the 08.
Yeah, I do get the variety pack. What's good about that is they're archival ink.
Right, exactly.
And so there are a lot of my originals now that are maybe 25 years old, where all the lines from the archival ink are still there, and the others I have to come back in and touch them up. We just donated some of them.
Yeah, and I sign prints with this.
Yeah.
When I give a print to somebody, I sign that with this because it's archival.
Yeah, so, I usually do it with a pencil.
Yeah.
But it still works on that. So it's funny just because I'm thinking about the same relationship I have with my kids on that. And I remember I was interviewing Robert Kayat, whose dad obviously was probably the most famous county commissioner on the coast, and was caught up in everything, was famous in his own right. And I asked Robert, I said, so in 2 or 3 words, describe your dad. And he said, public figure. And and it's hard, when you're dealing with a dad who's famous. And I've thought about that with my kids. I mean, I'm not famous, just to let you know that.
Yeah,
but I mean, how many times did they have to hear in school, can you draw too? And they don't draw. None of my kids. In fact, when they do pick up a pencil draw, I hit their hands with a ruler because I want them to have a career where I have a good nursing home. That's kind of my goal. Like be an accountant or be a lawyer. But no, I'm kidding though. But it is, for me as a parent, I think you're probably the same way. It's just recognizing your child's talent and then figuring out how can you encourage them
without becoming overbearing.
Right.
And how old are your kids?
23, 20, and I've got a 16-year-old.
Okay, so mine's about to be 22. So
we're in the same.
I've got 3, but I only have 1. But
yeah. Well, we couldn't figure out what was causing it, so But we got 3 now.
So yeah. I mean, you want to give them the space to grow and become who they're meant to be. Yeah. But you don't want to issue too much control over that. You want it to happen organically and in its own time. And when my daughter was originally going to major in communications with a minor in photography, and she switched, so now she's majoring in photography and minoring in communications. And I think it's great. She does nice work, and I told her I will critique you, give you a critique if you want me.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm going to tell you all your work is great.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. I mean, she's never asked me. She sent me pictures that she shot, but she never asked, what do you think?
Oh.
So I just say, well, that's really cool. That's great. I like it. Because I don't want to discourage her. I don't want to.
Right.
And at that age, it's very easy to take even the most simple critique the wrong way.
Right. Because you don't want to kill the dream before it gets out of the ground.
Exactly. And then, she's been able to watch how hard it is for me to make a living.
Yeah.
I mean, in essence, I don't make a living, but she's been able to see that. So she's decided that she wants to try to do photography, and more power to her. She'll blaze her own path.
But that's the thing. I mean, you're kind of being probably a little hard on yourself, but I get it because I feel the same way. But at the end of the day, she's watched you, and she's watched, and she knows that she can do it. And she's seen how it can be done.
Exactly.
And in a way, just through your actions, you turned out to be a pretty good dad.
Exactly. Yeah. So you just you got to send them out the door and keep your fingers crossed, and they'll do their own thing.
You got to get an environment too where they can fail but they do it in a safe way, so because that's how you learn, and that's how I learned, and that's how you're learning in your career.
Well, I'm still failing.
Yeah, no, but that's how. Like I said, that's the beauty of art.
Exactly.
If there's anybody who thinks that they can be an artist and not fail, they're naive. You know, and it's especially now with AI and all the crazy stuff that's going on, and with the internet and people not wanting to pay for images. And I know you as a photographer had the same thing. I mean, editorial cartoons have basically become memes, and so there's like 8 of us left. You know,
Right.
so it's been interesting watching my profession change. But and yours is changing. Technology, good Lord. I mean, you were talking about shooting at the Jackson newspaper in the 80s. How different the world is now from when you were shooting back then.
And you know, it used to be my highest ambition in the world in about 1985 or 86 was to be a staff photographer at the Clarion Ledger. You know, the Clarion Ledger had a great photo staff.
Yeah.
It was a great newspaper. They'd won a Pulitzer Prize. They covered the state really well, but they would never hire me. And I knew everybody there.
Why wouldn't they hire you?
Because it was a Gannett paper, and they always hired from within.
Yeah.
And so in late '86, I was offered a job at the Jackson Sun in Jackson, Tennessee.
Oh, there you go. Good enough paper.
Which is a Gannett paper, and I called Chris Dodd, who was the photo director at the time. I said, I've been offered this job, but I'd really rather come work for you. And he said, well, you can get her quicker from there. You know, so the idea was that, you know, I'd go to Jackson, and then they'd have an opening at Clarion Ledger, and I would apply, and I would get it. Well, that never happened, and I met a woman and went off to graduate school, and never got to work at the Clarion Ledger.
And the rest is history.
And of course, I wouldn't work there now if you couldn't pay me enough.
Well, they wouldn't hire you because
I mean, you know, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
Here. Do we hang on that?
No, I got it.
Okay. Your book is trying to like put it into you. But the same way with cartoonists. You know, I mean, it was like, you know, I mean, they hired me back in '96, but now Gannett has no editorial cartoonists. So it's a weird world we live in. But that said, the same skill sets that made you a great photographer in 1987 make you a great videographer and a great photographer now.
Yeah.
It's just different clients, different medium, and different so forth. So,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you're doing today?
Well, I've become sort of predominantly a filmmaker, because I can't make a living as a still photographer. I still photograph a lot.
Yeah.
I'm affiliated with an agency in New York, and I will go shoot an event, you know, like Jazz Fest. I'll go shoot it, and I'll send them work, but they won't sell it.
Yeah.
So I'm mainly just going through the motions, and I'm trying to stop doing that because it's a waste of time. I mean, I do it for my personal validation, and I really don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
So I'll shoot periodically. I'll do stuff for friends. But I've mainly been doing film work, and I just got a grant from the Mississippi Humanities Council to do a film on the woman I did my master's thesis on, Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister, who was the first black woman to get a PhD in education from Columbia University's Teachers College in 1929.
Oh, wow.
And I'm working with her cousin to try to make her house in Vicksburg a museum. And I've done a bunch of interviews back in August on campus at Jackson State. And I found some old VHS tapes I had done of her back in 1988, which are, you know, the audio's not very good, the video's not very good, but I'll be able to use snippets of it.
That's right.
Because it's her.
Right.
And it'll give people a sense of who she is. And so that's one of the things I'm working on. Before the pandemic, I was working on a film on the local photographers who covered Katrina in New Orleans and on the Gulf Coast. Yeah. And that was going gangbusters. I'd done 35 interviews, and I have a 13-minute trailer, which will just, you know, make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And then the pandemic hit, and it just shut me down, and I've not been able to get it going again. And I've got to do it. If I'm going to do it, I got to do it soon because we're coming up on the 20th anniversary.
That's right.
I got to have something in place in early 2025, because after the 20th anniversary, nobody's going to care.
I know, you know, it's the same thing with 9/11. I'm sitting here talking to a class of students up here at Ole Miss, and none of them were born when 9/11. So I might as well have been talking about Herbert Hoover or bombing of Pearl Harbor. You know, so yeah, definitely on Katrina. But you know, it was interesting. Like 10 years old, I remember at 10 years, everybody threw big celebrations and everything like that. And since then, it's pretty much been quiet. So, were you down in New Orleans during the storm?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, we evacuated. We came up to Jackson, but I was back in pretty quickly. I wasn't there for all the stuff at the Superdome and the Convention Center, which is probably a good thing, because I would have burned out too quickly.
You'd have probably a PTSD to this day. That was pretty horrific.
Well, I mean, I still have it, but I got it over a long period of time.
Yeah.
basically living in a disaster zone, photographing people who'd lost everything. I mean, I photographed post-Katrina New Orleans for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then the phone stopped ringing.
Right.
And then that was it. The story was dead.
Yeah. It's amazing how we as a country move on.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that, as soon as we started to record this interview, that it became rush hour in plein air. I've literally not seen this many cars.
I know, there have been like 6 cars go by.
Yeah, it's like, that's okay. But yeah, I always kind of joke, half jokingly, that the one thing being a cartoonist in Mississippi has taught me how to draw damage. I'm very good at that. So, but the thing is, and like I said, you're such a natural storyteller. I mean, you're a good storyteller when you're on a panel. You're a good storyteller whether you're doing video or you're doing it behind a camera and everything else. And like I said, the AI thing, somebody asked me about that, because you can sit there and do an AI cartoon. It still looks kind of like AI, but it doesn't look like an editorial cartoon. But at the end of the day, people want to hear what you have to say. And I mean, you, not me,
right.
but you. But I mean, like I said, I think at the end of the day, that there always will be something for you out there.
There has to be.
There has to be, because I like to eat. How about you?
I need to eat.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, we ate a lot today for lunch, so definitely on that. As we're coming up on, I guess, closing in on the interview, like I said, there's probably been a lot of things I have not asked. But is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm just happy to be here and be here with you and be here with all these people at the conference. And I love Mississippi. My father always used to like to quote the late David Sansing and saying, sometimes you love Mississippi, but Mississippi doesn't love you back. I did live here for 3.5 years in the mid-'80s. Lived in Vicksburg for 2 years. Loved Vicksburg. Still have friends there. But I live in New Orleans because New Orleans is a great city, and we have our share of problems in New Orleans.
That saltwater dome, man.
Well, they say now it's not going to get to the city. I don't know if that's true or they're just trying to keep us from panicking. But that's a typical Louisiana crisis. But I love Louisiana. I love New Orleans, and I don't know where else. I thought about this after Katrina. Where do you move to from New Orleans?
Well, I mean, I've always said that about Mississippi, and the fact that if you're a storyteller, why live any place that doesn't have good stories? And we have great stories here. New Orleans definitely has great stories.
And when I was living here in the 80s, there were just fabulous stories, and I chased every last one of them down that I could.
Yeah.
And including doing the story on Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister for the Vicksburg Evening Post that, over the course of 4 years turned into my master's thesis.
That's amazing.
So I of course, nobody's heard of her outside of a small community. There's a dormitory named for her at Jackson State. She died in '96 at the age of 96.
Oh wow!
But she was a trooper. She was a great educator. She believed in education, and she was a great spirit. In many ways, I was one of her last students.
Yeah.
I met her when she was 86.
And just think how many people, when they see this documentary, will continue to be her student.
Yes. So I'm gonna to start an online fundraiser. About 3 weeks on her birthday, what would have been her 124th birthday, I think.
Oh wow.
October 24th, to try to raise money to supplement the grant, to help pay those expenses. So tune in.
Oh, I will. Like I said, like we talked a lot about being a dad, and the effect of your dad, and I think about my dad and the encouragement he gave me, but also maybe some obstacles along the way too. And now I'm thinking about, my kids and of course your daughter. Mm-hmm. And I mean, your daughter's got a good role model. She really does. Mm-hmm. And, at the end of the day, we just have to keep doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my father died at the age of 64, which I'm going to be 64 in 3 weeks.
Wow.
So I'm, it's kind of a scary kind of conjunction.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, does that keep you up at night thinking?
I have terrible insomnia, which I blame on Katrina.
Yeah.
So some nights I sleep well, some nights I don't. But it was 64 years, 247 days.
Yeah.
And I did the math for me, and my 247th day falls on the 4th of July.
Really?
So, we'll have a big party and have fireworks and celebrate July 4th, and then July 5th, it's like I'm in uncharted emotional and physical territory. But I try to stay fit. I belong to the New Orleans Athletic Club. Try to go every day, do yoga, do cardio classes. Ate too much fried chicken today.
Yeah.
But try to stay fit so that I can hit that 248 today. But I was talking to a friend of mine here yesterday and telling him, he said, yeah, my brother, he made note that he had passed our father by a year, and then he dropped dead. So there are no guarantees.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I can guarantee something. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been fun. Like I said, I always love seeing you, and thank you for agreeing to doing this today.
Well, thank you for having me.
That'd be great.
Read good books.
And this is an excellent book.
But don't read it all in one sitting.
Yeah.
People have done that, and I try to, because it's such an emotional load.
It is, and it's just a beautiful book.
And one more thing I'll say about Kaylee Jones, who is the daughter of James Jones, the great World War II writer. She wrote a book called Lies My Mother Never Told Me.
Oh, really?
And I had mentioned it in my introduction, and I read it, and it so blew me away that I had to find her to write my foreword. And I hadn't talked to her in 20 years, and I finally tracked her down. And I said, Kayla, you got to do this. You're the only one that can do it. It's going to write itself.
Yeah.
And she did it in about 3 weeks. And it's stunning. And the reason her book was so moved me so much is because I knew all the characters.
Right.
I knew her father, I knew her mother, I knew her brother, I knew all the cousins, I knew the friends. So every time she was talking about something, I knew that she was talking about. So it really hit me personally. So she did a great job, and I'm really, really happy to have her on board on this project.
David, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marshall.
Where can folks find your work? You got a website?
DavidRaeMorris.com, RAE, one word.
Very good. Thank you. Hey, and thank you for watching a traffic-y episode of Mississippi Stories right here on the front porch here in Plain Air. Thank you for watching. And to see more episodes, you can go to MississippiToday.org, or you can, of course, check out my cartoons at MississippiToday.org as well. Hey, thank you, and we'll see you next time on Mississippi Stories.